to see you again. These conversations are so stimulating. It's a pleasure to be part of them, and it feels like something special is growing here. Really good. So nice to see you all.
Yes, likewise.
Okay, I'm going to kick off by reading this, and then I'll move forward to what probably will be the last of this series of talks about Sophia, Philosophia, Anthroposophia. Okay, so this is from Super Sensible Man, 18th of November, 1923, when he's talking about this being that we are trying to let grow in us. Then anthroposophy will appear to us increasingly as a living being, and we will become aware that something is knocking at the threshold of our heart saying, "Let me in, because I am you yourself. I am your true nature, your very humanity." Okay, so we are going to skip all the way forward. We did this last time, it's evolution. So I'm going to start with this slide, and we'll do our standard. I'll do a little talk and then reflections, because that seems to be so fruitful. I added this slide literally this morning because I've been listening to the final chapter of Riddles of Philosophy. I've listened to it 4 times in the last 72 hours, and I'm just completely taken by it and trying to incorporate some of the things that's happening to me into this presentation. And it seems to me we need to make clearer this idea of involution or evolution through involution. And I grabbed an image that Steiner says represents this. This is from GA 267, and he says if you want to get a feeling for what evolution is, meditate on these images. But I'm going to try and describe it and why it's relevant to this process here. We've been looking at the development of Sophia and wisdom and thinking as a being that has developed through humanity, and we're going to map that out in more detail today. But one of the essential ideas that reading the Riddles of Philosophy, one of the essential ideas that you are confronted with is that in the Greek world, the thoughts were outside of the human being. When these philosophers were philosophizing, they weren't doing what we are doing something that is internal to us, through our own process. They saw thought forms together with the outside phenomena of nature. So they had a complete picture of nature in that sense. That's thought was directly mapped onto physical perception. We don't have that any longer. We have to create thoughts to understand the world. And this is an essential part of what is going on in this evolution of Sophia, that what was outside then becomes an internal faculty in us. So in thousands of years ago, the spiritual world was outside of humanity, and that humanity saw itself as the receiver of impulses from without. And this changes fundamentally. We see it in philosophy, and if we look at the rest of anthroposophy, we see multiple of examples of how this expresses itself, and the disappearance of clairvoyance and that type of thing. So I think it's important to have that in mind as we go through here, that what was outside is coming inside us. And one of the often cited examples, if you look in in sort of like anthroposophical work is how in ancient Greece you can actually identify to around about the 4th, 5th century BC when the Furies turned into the conscience. It's like saying an inner voice didn't exist in ancient Greece, in ancient Greek literature. So you look at, I haven't got the name of the playwrights as like in my head at the moment, but certain playwrights, they didn't use the word conscious. And then 100 years later, you're seeing playwrights no longer talking about the Furies or the Erinyes, I think they're called. It's like forces that punish man from outside, but instead those Furies have become an inner voice that is the one that sort of like works on the moral education of mankind.
It's fascinating as well because we can talk about a turning point in time which happened in this era, and after that everything is different. You're talking about what was outside becomes in, and if we have like the external, the spatial world outside, and then time is the sort of element in which thoughts move, so that they perceive thoughts outside, and now if they come into us, then they can in a sense turn around in us and go back out. So even there you can see a sense of this turning point of time. So and that is a revolutionary thing, especially say if you think of Darwin and so forth, where you just think of like an endless progression in one direction, but you've introduced this idea of involution as well.
Jeff, Sophia, want to add anything, or shall I move on?
I find it key maybe here in this inversion that morality is the player, is the catalyst, the agent of continuity, really, with the Greeks in this sense, that there is a moral structure to the nature of reality that was a given as perception to them, and for us is in our own nature as individuals. And I really like some of Jordan Peterson's imagery in this, as associated with this, though he's bound to the Darwinian evolutionary model. The idea that if you don't, let's say, in a Steinerian sense, develop a moral imagination, nature itself will snap back at you. That there's no way to be removed from the basic infrastructure of the way the world is value laden.
That is so interesting you said that, Jeff, because that must be key, because it's the sense that so thought is not just like, bare scaffolding of how things are made or something like that, as we might think of something like, I don't know, Platonic forms or something. But there's a morality, there's a living relation and responsibility and so forth within all this care, protection, etc.
I've just recently recapped on *Sapiens*, Yuval Harari. I read it when he first wrote it, but then came back to it, and there's a few things that struck me when I read it this time round, and one of them was that he really talked about most things in life we construct and they're myths, and I'm not going to agree with that. I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm more with yourselves and with Jeff that there is a natural order, and there are some myths that are closer to reality than others. But what I found interesting was his belief through *Sapiens* that progress was self-evident, that it was obvious. that it was the way that the universe is, and to me that's a myth. And I think it was David. I mean, Jaffe, you would know David Bohm and expliciting and impliciting, and I think also you mentioned to me a few months ago about Goethe talking about how there's two spirals, there's one going out and there's one coming in at the same time, and that's quite consistent with Aristotle's view as well of aletheia coming out and lethe coming in, and protecting that's being formed. So the interesting thing there is involution is like a lethe, which is a fury, it's a discord, like a goddess, and aletheia is coming out. So yeah, I just wanted to, I suppose, raise the point that our modern day mindset assumes that progress is a thing and that it's definite, and I think it's definitely worth bearing that in mind as we sort of pursue this discussion.
Okay, I'm going to move on. So I mentioned the example with the Furies becoming conscious, but of course we've got a huge, very much more obvious example, which is the Hebrew folk, the Hebrew. What was the Hebrew mission? So I'm using this let me connect that thought with the previous thought, that basically that the Jewish nation, that the Hebrew mission was to internalize God. God was an internal voice instead of an external authority, and connecting this to the Sophia being the Kyrieutetes as a development. If I just like quickly remind this development that we're looking at here, that we can actually begin to like trace out so like some of the way markers on the evolution of this being into humanity. Because what is it that's given to us through thinking? It is our own essence, or it has the possibility of giving us our own essence. To take my stereotypical dog, it is never going to be capable of understanding itself. Humanity is moving forward on that path towards understanding its material nature and more into the future, its spiritual nature. Despite having a spiritual heritage, it's moving forward to an individual consciousness of this relationship, direct living relationship with the spiritual world. And in the Hebrew folk, we have we can look at the first period, which was 2000. These dates that I'm giving, I just do want to remind, are very fluid, but they're more or less correct. But if we look at the period from 2100 BC to 1400 BC, this is when Sophia was working on the physical part of her incarnation. Remember, she has a body like a human being, physical, etheric, astral, etc. So she needs to develop these bodies on Earth as well.
Are you saying how a human physical body?
Well, I'd say this is going to be very tricky,
Okay.
but she is creating a physical vehicle for herself for her to reveal herself. This is the key idea that we're going to be looking at with the Hebrews and with the Greeks.
So I'm just going to leave that physical veil as a wide open possibility.
As a wide open. If you think of all the physical. All the human brains, the physical human brains on the planet, if you think of that as a body instead of individuals.
Okay.
So who is Abraham? He's in this period. He's the guy that kicks off the whole Hebrew movement towards there's a Messiah coming. He is initiated by Melchizedek, this son initiate. And he is given the mission of preparing the Hebrew folk for the reception of, for the creation of the body of the Messiah. It's like the bloodline is like hugely important. It's like the physicality is very important here in this whole in this whole process. And so there are two essential parts here that we want to remind ourselves of, that this is part of the internalization process. Abraham is the person that says God isn't outside, he's inside. He is also that impulse, which, so in Talmudic tradition, Abraham is depicted as the first mathematician. And why is that? It is because he is actually he has a physical brain that is capable of doing mathematics, if we put that very simplistically. And we can even if we look today, if you look at anthropological studies, there are certain tribes, if they've had no contact with Western thinking, they just have two numbers. They have one, perhaps three numbers, sorry, 1, 2, and many. And
what do you need?
that is all you need. That is all you needed. And prior to Abraham, as the archetype here, any other thinking wasn't even possible, because the physical brain hadn't even been evolved to entertain that type of thought. So the physical structure of the brain would not allow it. Just like we can easily imagine our dog is not capable of thinking. Why? Or mathematizing. It's not capable of doing that because it doesn't have the brain to do it. And of course, this isn't just like an on-off switch. This is a physical tool, the brain, that is gradually refined and refined and refined, so that the Sophia impulse can incarnate into it. And as we slowly start to pervade the world with mathematical thinking, it reveals secrets to us that we had no idea about before. Yeah.
Can I
yeah, go on.
I'm just a little offended that it's just the brain, and I have like a image of, a brain in a jar sort of thing. But I just want to give a little vote for the whole rest of the organism, which supports what is so special about the brain. And do you know what I mean? The dog also can't be upright, and we need to be upright so our brain can float as it does. So just put that as a...
Yeah, definitely. You need to be very flexible, very open-minded. I'm describing one aspect of it, and this is one aspect of something that's far huger than...
I appreciate you have to abbreviate.
I think that's important, actually, what you're saying, Jonathan, because if you... not to bring in other stuff from Steiner necessarily here, but it might be a little helpful. It's not earth-shattering, but the fact that the brain is in every other organ through the whole neurological system. So I think that the brain is a sphere, is a process activity, not the thing that's in our head. Although the thing in our head is the center for that, perhaps, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I would like to develop that, but I think we won't get off this first slide if we talk too much. Important talking points. Hopefully, we can remember to come back to them. I was thinking about etherization of the blood and these type of things, but we won't go there. So in this schema, Sophia is incarnating. She develops her physical body in the brain as we're presenting it here. And then we are through the conferences that I referenced last time, we're introduced to the idea that's between 1400 BC to 700 BC approximately, we have the evolution of the ether body, same for all of us human beings. And how did that represent itself in the Hebrew culture? Steiner tells us that, so like we look at how the spiritual world revealed itself to humanity. It's like in this period, and we can use Moses as an archetype. It's like with the burning bush, as it's like here we are talking about etheric forces that are that is the medium through which Sophia reveals herself. Okay, it's like she appears etherically in the elements. And then we go to the third period. So we're talking now between 700 to the incarnation of Christ to 0, which is best represented by Elijah. Elijah, so like when he talks about the appearance of God, it's often in the wind, which can be perceived as an element, but the wind or the breath is often perceived as described as a ruach in Hebrew, which can mean wind or it can mean spirit. But it's the spirit, so that reveals itself in the astral world. So it's as Sophia develops her astral body, her wisdom is given to humanity through its astral body. And if one was to like dig deeper into Elijah's vision of God, the chair and the four wheels, and these amazing images, we would recognize like the inspirational, i.e., astral nature of these revelations, these higher revelations of Sophia. Okay, they're no longer happening predominantly in the physical and the etheric, but they've shifted their ground, and that they're happening in the astral world. A couple of other observations we can make about this is that the Jews themselves, if we look specifically at the Gospel of Matthew, they have recognized, they talk about 3 times 14 generations. So like when they're doing the genealogy of the bloodline for Christ, they split it up into 3. And this can also be interpreted as a reflection also that how they experience like 3 phases of evolution in like for the Hebrew folk spirit, which was going to be create the vessel, the physical vessel for the incarnation of Christ.
So 3 times 14 is 42. So the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42.
Well spotted, Jonathan.
That's for readers of Douglas Adams.
Yep. What other things that so this is like a very brief glimpse at like the evolution that Steiner develops, and then Prokofiev in his books, he's like collates all this image. But when we're dealing with these type of things, it's important for us to recognize that we have to be very careful about, this isn't true because Steiner says it's true. These are supposed to be, these ideas are to be taken as, I've got, the German words popped in my head and I can't get it out of there now. Anregungen. It's like inspirations, but they're to be taken as,
they definitely provide food for thought that begins to kind of make
something to set thinking into motion, so that we can then read that literature and so like oh wow, if I take this conceptual model of what was going on in humanity at this time, this allows me to review the same content but see it through a different lens. And this is how like conceptual life enriches us as human beings, because things that were previously invisible Once we have the conceptual framework, they become invisible. I'm going to give us like a very trivial example, but if I don't have the concept of a tree, I will not see a tree. I'll see, even though it's there in my vision, I will not see it. And if we take these ideas and like review, like look at ancient documents through this lens also, then we can like discover some interesting things.
You would see like the leaves and movement and colour.
If you had a concept of a leaf, you would, yeah.
Yeah, but they wouldn't come together into this single organism, also connected with its whole environment. Yeah,
that's right. So you'd see the phenomena, but not the spiritual element behind it.
Sorry, Angus, I just had a question about this. Are we implying that this is actually a good thing, that Sophia is moving in this way? The reason that I'm asking that is that essentially it was the Hebrew culture that destroyed the matriarchy, the divine feminine temples, the ways of being with the divine feminine, the rituals, etc., the participation. And we talked last time about the soul being in the ground and it being very instinctive, not necessarily cerebral. And if you sort of imagine wisdom in that way, and then we take these sort of different elements of evolution or whatever it is, to me this seems quite paltry. It seems quite thin, to go from participating and being in the temple and being one and the same as Sophia to suddenly being a maths calculation and then being a wind and then being something else. To me, this doesn't seem like progress. So I just wondered
what a wonderful question. And I think the whole of the Riddles of Philosophy is testimony to why you've got a lot of people on your side who think exactly the same thing, and a lot of people in the church as well, as like who have as like a stereotypical idea of that life is suffering, and it's like the real life starts when we die, when we're together with God again. But if we take the idea seriously, that's like the Trinity, the Godhead, and all of these things are causing us to incarnate for a reason, and there is a good reason. So rather than the idea is not to escape from the earth, but it's like something unique can happen to us when we are incarnated. If we have that perspective and and hold firmly to that and begin to ask ourselves the question, what could that be? So like a possible answer to that is the development of individual consciousness. We have to, or the gods are encouraging us to divorce ourselves, to become independent, to become prodigal sons and daughters, to leave the family, leave the home that looked after us, that took care of all of our needs, and say, I'm going out into the world, I'm going to be an individual. And this is another lens through which you can look at what you're describing. It seems, I think a lot of people would say why couldn't I just sort of stay in the lap of the gods? I mean, paradise, that was quite a nice place to stay, wasn't it? why did we ever leave? And one image that I use to try and communicate what is a very complicated image is when we go to nursery school, we are very protected, assuming so like we've got so like good carers. And when we're at home in our youngest years, we are completely 100% dependent on our parents. And so like when we go to nursery schools, like they change their nappies, like they're the gods for us. They take care of every need, and we have no responsibility. We just play around. So we could choose to stay in that state. We could choose to stay at the nursery school level of development, where we have no responsibility, where we have no sense of, or hardly a sense of self. I mean, roughly they say at least like I consciousness like kicks in at around about 2 or 3. This is like one of the results of like the Luciferic impulse, that in a healthy, if Lucifer hadn't been like introduced to evolution, it would normally have, the I consciousness would have occurred around about 21 years of age, which also becomes significant when we look at the timeline here, because Sophia turns 21 the time Christ is born. So I've steered away from the point that I wanted to make. We could choose to stay in kindergarten, and I can understand why a lot of people would say, yep, if I look at that school, the next school up, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. I'm so happy here. I don't want to. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to get any older. And that for me is a very understandable take on life. But then there are people who sort of say, no, I want to grow up and become an free individual spirit.
So it sounds like we're saying that Sophia said, but before you go, dear son, dear daughter, take this from me with you. It's not much, but you're going to need it. And then it reminds me of the story of the 3 piggies.
Go on, how does it relate to 3 piggies, Jonathan?
Well, we're off there with Sophia, the little morsel of intellect that we were given over our shoulder, maths, what have you. And then we can either, just apply it to the first thing we come to and make a house of straw that gets blown down, or apply it to the second thing we come to and that gets blown down and gobbled up, or we can build something sound, take our time and let it develop.
When we in about 3 slides time, we're going to look at Isis, and that's going to be another image that we can use to, if I've understood what you're saying correctly, Sophia, that can also be another way of, another image we can use to not defend killing Sophia, but understanding why it might have been necessary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why we murdered Sophia.
I feel like I get what you're saying, Angus, but it's a little bit of an oversimplification of the processes and the danger associated with it, which is why our world is on fire with a confusion between justice and morality. And actually, we don't believe in morality from a mainstream standpoint. It's just a subjective outgas experience from your biophysiological meat bag. But we started this conversation with the idea that morality as love, really, this is what was so moving to me in sort of discovering what I was saying as I was saying it, is at the very heart of the nature of this evolutionary process, say, but it has to be chosen, and it has to be taken up as a free deed, and partly because of the Median-like murder of the divine feminine within culture. But it's also really important, I think, to I mean, I want to be free. You know, the joy of that possibility and the joy of progressing in that freedom puts me in touch with the well, it puts you in touch with everything that matters, including matter.
But it is a bit of a
Thank you for
quandary.
balancing that out there, Jeff. There's so many things need to be added to what's being said here. I agree. Sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
Well, just to say, but on the other hand, as Sophia pointed out, that freedom requires a sundering, and that sundering can entail disagreements, arguments, violence, etc. It's difficult. Say, Sophia, you asked, is it a good thing? And where I'm with it is, I don't know if it would be good to stay or to go, but it is a thing. It is happening. We are here.
One thing that I'd just say is, we talked about evolution and involution. So there's a remembering and a forgetting. And what I would say is that what's happened, and perhaps what we needed to bring with us, was a memory of what it used to be like, because I do believe that we'll get back there again. We'll be different. We'll go through a gyre, but we'll go back there again. And I think we were always meant to remember what that was like. And we were bringing out fairy tales, Three Little Piggies. It's almost like a Hansel and Gretel. We've dropped breadcrumbs hoping that we'll remember where we came from, but the breadcrumbs have been eaten. And we don't have those esoteric texts now. We don't have that type of schooling to help us remember where we came from and where we've been and where we're going. So, and that's the involution part, I think, that is missing. We're just all about evolution and not about involution. So that's just my view anyway.
That's wildly important, I think, what you're saying, connecting all of this, because now you're talking about remembering in as a knowledge, say, and that memory isn't something that is a representation of the past, but is a remembering of origins. And origins are with us all the time, ever present, just as the turning point in time is now present for all of us in the nature of things, say, including our own individual natures, but maybe especially at this point, our own individual natures.
Okay. Lots of interesting points coming out there. It's a complex area to talk about. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide if nobody wants to add anything. Okay, there's a bit more text in this. So if we take the idea that we've taken the idea that the Hebrew mission was to prepare the physical body so that Christ could incarnate, the purity of the blood, and that's like the development of these bodies, so it could become a bearer of the Christ being that was preparing to enter into the flesh, something the Gnostics couldn't even conceive. So what was the Greek mission, and how do they figure in this? And here it's like we're encouraged to entertain the idea that Christ was being incarnated in a time that was incapable of understanding what the Christ impulse was, what it represented for humanity. But this was actually the very nature of what the Greeks were their gift to humanity, if you like, was to develop the capacity of like a thinking relationship. So we had prepare body and then prepare the mind to gradually reveal what this Christ being is. So like in the anthroposophical like perspectives, like the turning point of time, the central point of like the earthly mission to develop love on earth. And so this period was like this period Steiner often characterized it as it was from a certain sense, and this comes back to the question we just had up on the table here. From a certain sense, Christ was it was the worst time for Christ to be born if he was to be understood. It would have been far better for him to be born in the ancient Indian or Persian epoch, because we still had a spiritual grasp and experience of the world, and we would have recognized the truth of it. However, we would have, the idea is we would have been compelled to believe in Christ. We wouldn't have been able to have a free relationship to this being. Christ had to incarnate like in the dark, in the middle of this, like the dark age, the Kali Yuga, for the very specific reason that like human individual freedom and its connection to the Christ impulse had to be based in that. Like there is no element of compulsion here. I, as an individual, choose to develop a relationship to it. And if I grow up in a culture where it's like Christ is like preached all the time and I'm punished if I don't believe in Christ, that's not a free relationship to Christ. So the Greeks, they were sort of like somehow involved in preparing the through Sophia, they had the role of developing like a thinking relationship to this divine impulse. And so a couple of the things that that Steiner, Prokofiev point to here are we can look at how I will briefly mention Crete, because I've brought it up here. That's like Crete represents the period, so the minus 1400 to minus 700 BC, in this period where going back to the Abraham period, it's like the more physical brain aspect of it. And he highlights that, so like in ancient Crete, we've got the story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur in the center, and Theseus, sort of like the red thread, sort of like going through there. And this labyrinth, according to Steiner, did really exist in reality, and it was also a physical representation of something they experienced as a truth. The brain was the brain was a maze in which one could get lost.
I think of the modern day The Shining, where there's the Jack Nicholson character standing looking at the map of the maze, and then the film ends, he's frozen this deathly in the icy maze forever.
Jeff, did you want to add something? You looked
at... it just relates to what we were just talking about, the memory, the origins, but also the necessary need to enter that maze, to come out the other side, really, in a different way than the Minotaur, in a different way than, well, the other side is the beginning, isn't it?
In The Shining,
slaying your monsters, yeah.
Yeah, the young boy comes out of the maze with his mother. They escape.
With the mother.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. with the origins.
And so I was using Sophia's imagery there. This is a breadcrumb. This is a breadcrumb, and only people who sort of like have a feeling relationship to that there could be some sort of like deeper truth to this will sort of like feel the urge to ask themselves the question: how could the Cretans sort of like why? What were they? Why would they invent a maze with us like with a savage monster in the middle? Well, a modern like natural scientific minds are like, oh, it's just an invention. Nothing happening here. So like, let's go and rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic type of thing. Whereas those people who sort of like do have us like an artistic sense is what they recognize. This is a breadcrumb. This is a pointer. A very sort of like it's an old stale breadcrumb, but it's definitely a breadcrumb that humanity left for those people that are interested to pick up on. And then when they taste that breadcrumb again, and they begin to like feel that this is so much more, I begin to understand an aspect of the truth of this myth, then it becomes something that's like that's life enhancing, that gives energy instead of like just like some poetic notion.
I think like the myth is quite complicated, but my understanding is it started with Zeus. Zeus being a naughty boy, and he got cast away, and by the lady love, and he got the lady love to fancy a bull, and then essentially that's what she gave birth to, was this monster, if my understanding is correct. And then in Crete, they had to sacrifice young maidens to the monster.
One male and one female, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Innocence at any rate. Yep. And so Theseus has to go in and do what he's got to do. But essentially, it's not really his problem, his fault. None of it is anybody's fault, but it's something that we've inherited.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're maturing, I suppose, and we're having to deal with the sins of our fathers, or the gods, or whatever. So I think there's that as well, that element of it's not just that we've left kindergarten, but now we're having to fight battles that other people have left for us.
Yeah.
They've left,
but it
collective deviations over the millennia, and I think that's what we're facing today, is these collective deviations. It does feel like we're in that maze every day, and we don't know what that monster is, or how it was created, or why.
There's another side to it as well, that although it's the sins of our fathers and so forth, we're in the pickle we're in now. There's also the joyous side, which is that, so what is this new thing we can create out of this new situation that we're in?
So you mentioned the bull there, Sophia. So another thing that Steiner tells us is that the abduction of Europa by Zeus as a bull, what is going on there? That this is like a passing of the reins from the will imbued civilization, it's like the unconscious but profound knowledge of the ancient Egyptians. It's like literally, it's like crossing the water to Greek and then to Greece as like the next impulse, as like for humanity forward, is like passed on to the Greeks. So this will impulse is this evolution of consciousness impulse is being passed on to the Greeks. But if we move forward to the 1400s BC to 700 BC period, what is going on here? Remember we talked about the etheric and Moses, like for the Hebrews. How did that represent itself in the Greeks? This is when we see so this amazing mythology being developed by the Greeks. So what the picture that's given is that this is when we start the Zeus stories, and so like the whole of the other mythology. This was being revealed to the Greek mind in this period, and they were the receivers of this. So like they saw in the etheric world, they saw in the elements what was where our spiritual heritage was. And then we come to the period where we start the Riddles of Philosophy, which is 700 to BC to 0 to the birth of Christ.
So can we say, just trying to get sort of get a grasp on this, that the myths of the Greeks are in a sense their thoughts as they saw them?
They are pre-philosophical thinking. They are how the spiritual world revealed itself in the etheric world to the Greeks. They saw these images in the etheric world.
Right. So when they see the bull passing to Europa, etc., that if we approach that same thing today, it would be a thought. It'd say, "Oh, okay, so the cultural baton or whatever is being passed." Oh, so we just think it in like that, whereas they saw it in these images, and that was what thoughts for them.
It was the imaginative consciousness that Anthroposophia talks so much about. It's like it's spiritual truths that can reveal themselves that can't reveal themselves in sort of simple sense perceptual in the sense perceptual world. It's not fluid enough. It's not mobile enough.
It's funny what Sophia said, that experience must have been so vivid and full of life, and it's paltry the kind of by comparison that our thoughts we have about that. And you know, she mentioned Yuval Harari, not to sort of point to a person, but that kind of thinking that, oh, these are just myths, because from our sort of paltry perspective, we can't quite comprehend the sort of
the grandeur of them.
Yeah, I've been
but
that's that fictionalization, the feeling that everything is fiction. It's just a story we tell ourselves, and we're basically deluded. That's something that well, I've been in a side conversation with David for the Footnote group, and he seems to be pretty wrapped up in that notion that everything is a fiction, basically, except the reality that he, whatever.
Because you have to have a base reality, or else what's it a fiction of?
Well, it's just a story you tell yourself. There,
an illusion, a story, a dream of a dream.
Yes, it's Brazil, the movie Brazil.
Yeah.
But that fictionalization maybe is also a symptom of the evolution of consciousness as well, right? So the importance of that then occurred to the pragmatists, say, in a new way, and then where they were very clever in coming up with all of their abstractions that were existentially useful to life, say.
And I'd just like to build on. Were you done there, Jeff? I'd like to build on what you're saying there. Again, this ties in so tightly in my mind to the final chapter of the Riddles of Philosophy. We're talking about a weakness. It's like in our, we still think in shadows, but once we have begun to experience our soul life as something that is not a result of material processes, but as something that stands as an interface either towards the physical or towards the spiritual world. Once we begin to understand sort of like its own essence, its like essential nature, then we can re-find like the the truth in these stories, but our thinking is shadow thinking. It's dead shadow thinking at the moment, so it can't experience the life that it's in them.
But isn't that interesting that it's a dead shadow thinking that thinks that all thinking is dead shadow thinking, right? It's like
a little bit of projectionism, isn't it?
Projectionism, transference, all of those.
Yeah,
right.
All of those things.
Yeah.
But it's strange, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's being very honest, because it's saying, my thoughts are just flimsy constructs.
That's right. Yeah.
It's also saying, it's not saying my thoughts are, it's saying your thoughts are. Because
that's good point. Good point.
I probably have a more clever version of this story than you do, is what it's saying. And by the way, what you're saying is unjust, or it's right, because if there is no more moral imagination, which is a different level of thinking, then morality is just justice. It's just a fictional game we play, and the power to wield that is all that's left. Who gets the power to wield it, because they think they've got a better idea of how to pragmatically wield that.
I think Steiner has this lovely expression for that. I thought that you're giving there, Jeff. We are all mini popes. So, like, my view of the world is the right way, and of course that's how we experience it. We can't do any other way until we become humble enough to recognize that perhaps I don't understand everything, and perhaps somebody else who spent more time looking at a specific question, perhaps that person might actually have an interesting angle that will allow me to grow in a direction where I am at the moment stunted. But that does require humility that popes don't have. Shall I move on? Did you feel that was in line with what you were saying there, Jeff? Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
So go on, refine the thinking then.
I'd rather continue and see how it fleshes out, because there's definitely a thread here for us, and I don't want to overemphasize something too thinly.
Yeah. So coming to the final period, Sophia, she's starting to develop her astral body. How does that present itself in the Greek world? This is where philosophy is born. Thinking starts to try to it's experienced in the Greeks as something that is external to nature. It's given to us when we see nature. We see the astral truths, as it were, behind the physical appearances, the spiritual truths. And I think I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that I wanted to add there. No, nothing's coming to mind other than again, it's this becomes a useful model that for us to play with, to go back to Greek thinking and understand it as this is the Greeks being the impact of Sophia developing her astral body during this period is reflected in the Greeks in this way, that humanity begins to become conscious of this tool called thinking. This is I think the essence for me of what is going on here.
If you follow also the line of thinking and the evolution of thinking as an organism, say, that he so ingeniously lays out, to say the least, in Riddles of Philosophy. This is what I contend is the moment the soul is born for humanity as an independent entity. That's a phenomenological reality that takes on an independence. It's not just reflective anymore. It's not just an instrument, say, for an instrument it's not just an instrument, and it becomes its own. It has its own will forces in it. It has its own thinking processes. The emotional life becomes something more internalized and key to perception. As that's starting to arise, the way in which perception will be start to enter the world stage with Kant and Hume and overwhelm. So now the time is coming here where one-sided soul aspects can take over the world stage at any moment, right? And so I think this was right around the time Heraclides singled out the one mother, the fire mother, as the origin of all existence, whereas for Heraclides and Pythagoras, the three mothers were a unity, a trinity unity.
And as we've mentioned before, it's like this is also when it's like mathematica, physica, musica, geometria, and these were like experienced as divine beings imparting their knowledge to humanity, not humanity creating that knowledge out of it's like an individual consciousness. I'm going to flash up this. I'm going to flash up the next slide. If you just talk amongst yourselves for like 2 minutes, I'll just and then I'll be back. Okay.
Yeah.
Jeff, you were about to say something.
It'd be interesting to think through what Sophia is giving us today, because I think what this points to is that the divine feminine never disappeared from existence, was not eliminated, but like the role that the feminine played was in the apparent background, but was still this powerful force that it was, and that what she's giving us here in Greek times is a soul body that will be necessary for us to take up the freedom. She's not a cloying mother here. She's not an Oedipal mother. She's the selfless mother.
I agree with you, Jeff. Actually, like viscerally, when we talk about things like maths and physics and all those sorts of things, it all seems so masculine, and it's the birth of technology. And it feels to me that these are the gifts that Sophia gave us. But in doing that, she actually sacrificed herself. And she gave us these gifts, and we kind of took them and used them and forgot about her. And we used them to the wrong effect, essentially. She gave us a chance, you know. She gave her son the car key and said, "Be good," and then he's just doing donut spins. And, he's
doing donut spins, and but he's more like a 12-year-old with a car key, right, rather than a 18-year-old or a 16-year-old even.
And it goes
blowing
back
up
to
frogs.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, I just experimenting on nature as if that were an experience one could have, rather than an externalizing need for proving oneself, or finding the security without the mother, who's really just said, "On your way, figure it out."
And suddenly we now have a brain that masters nature. It's now not part of nature. It's man versus wild.
Yeah. But can it master what it doesn't really sort of grasp fully? It's it can sort of demand and force, but you know, you could argue that's not true, like kingship. The sense I'm getting is of you were talking about the birth of the soul, and so I was getting a sense of like an amoeba. There's sort of a tiny amoeba has finally separated off. The birth is where it actually there's a separation, and if Sophia is also still in here, there's a lot, because before, once we were at one with everything, it was kind of catered for and it was flowing through us and we were part of that life. But now it's kind of separate. I can kind of understand why Heraclitus or someone might sort of look to one part of it and say, okay, I can deal with this. It seems, this is amazing, but then miss the other parts. And, you know, our sort of steps since then are perhaps more of that kind of same, you know, until eventually perhaps it can be this soul can be as complete as that soul was.
In the previous to the last chapter of Riddles of Philosophy, we didn't talk about it in the footnotes group, but he utilized Einstein and material science as well to illustrate that the fact that there is a supersensible world, and material science as natural science renders itself null and void with relativity. And he's not arguing against the notion. He's just saying that's the fact that needed to be come to,
And in fact, the inevitable
fact that
yeah.
we needed to come to, as we denied that which is the most crucial aspect of existence. And so that established the spiritual fact that there's a supersensible world, and then also people were denying the existence of the soul, and but the soul won't be denied, and so the experience of that isolation in the soul is a fact. And of course, nobody's arguing that we don't have biophysiology, except maybe David. And but those three things as separate, and the need to have them integrated also are mirrored in the soul with thinking, feeling, and willing, right?
Yeah.
And then in the last chapter, it lays bare that spiritual science is the next evolutionary step. And so the soul's heritage, it ends with the reality of reincarnation. And in spiritual science as a foundation for social forms, he describes that process as one of memory, that we have to remember where we came from, and we will eventually remember where we came from. And that is a purely spiritual world, distinct from the soul and the biophysiological, but also it's incarnating into those. While there's also this evolution, there's this is the involution that's describable. And here you could say, with the Greeks at this point and into the Romans, that an epistemology is born, but an epistemology that will result with an understanding of how feeling and willing work into thinking.
It's interesting as well, isn't it, that a lot of the Greek texts we actually lost in Europe. they tried to destroy them, whoever they were, and a lot of these
Mini popes.
were kept in the Arabic countries. And
who was one of the most
was,
important people in communicating it? It was actually Boethius. He was a significant source for the Latin speaking world, and apparently he was like one of the key people for around about 1,000 years. This person who had this visit, it's like in his cell, in Lady
Wow.
Philosophy. Very, very interesting. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought there. I wanted to enhance what you were saying, Sophia. Perhaps.
No, that's fine. No, I was just thought that was worth raising. It's almost like I remember when I was watching last week, and one of you said the soul is separating, and this is what we're really talking about now. The soul is separating, and as I heard that, I wrote a note saying the soul is separating, but it has no foothold. So it's like it's born, but it's been thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and it has no garments of skin. It doesn't even remember what Eden is, and it's a total orphan, and it's totally lost. Because a lot of what we're talking about now, I think most people wouldn't know the Greek myths or what philosophy is even. And these things.
Carry on.
And these things you can't just imbibe. You know, they have to be taught and schooled, trained, instituted.
Yes and no. Because if they become instituted and then you are run through that mill of institution, then like then I think it's more difficult to talk about an act of freedom. Whereas if we all have to approach this individually, if we all have to rediscover this individually, that is a more obvious expression of individual freedom. But of course, so like we can't, like Jeff, I think you pointed this out very importantly last time. It's like but institutions are important, but these have to be institutions that we willingly associate with. So therefore, they can't be government institutions. So, because government is about imposition, we have to freely choose to associate with people who we believe are, it's like who have a commonality of spirit. It's like it might be a common purpose, a common vision, a true passion for an element of reality that we want to develop together.
Like children, like Waldorf schools, like the whole picture of what it is to cultivate the ground out of which that kind of individuality grows into adulthood. That's the kind of institution. It's a cultural institution for sure, right?
But that also can be corrupted. This is the huge problem with Waldorf education. The schools that are more interested in it's like topical political themes than it's like the essence of it's like the development of the individual.
Well, that's why this conversation we're having is so important, because it is in terms, we can speak in terms not of etheric body and astral body necessarily, these sorts of things. That whole radical secularization, one-sided secularization approach is a symptom of our time.
Yeah.
And it's asking for a response, and to just go into our little anthroposophical bubble and speak about these things in an abstract way, rather than being able to provide the epistemology of love, say, for example, and then also to get that intergenerational transfer, as Zach Stein might say, but it's not an information transfer. It's a developmental evolutionary transfer that's possible right now in a new way because of that secularization, in a sense, because it's coming up for discussion. We can do away with it in a certain sense, or grow past it, or do as Steiner did methodologically, which is to go right into the thinking of that kind of all of the symptoms, but the predominant thoughts of the time, and grow them out of themselves, right? From justice to morality, say.
Okay. I'm just wondering. So, why did I put this slide into it? It is just to emphasize this point that I think I stated a couple of times. Is we've got this idea of these. The Christ impulse is central here, and Sophia is like working in one way to reveal herself, or part of revealing herself in humanity. It's like, because the Hebrew folk have a mission, but the Greek, Steiner talks about folk souls. It's like countries having like missions, in other conferences, and the Greeks, they had another goal, and it's specifically this that we're interested in. If we're interested in philosophy, it's a living being that is increasing our understanding of who we are and what we are and what life is. And as we've pointed out here, that's been perverted in many ways as we've gone through this individualization process. But I mentioned earlier that Sophia, it's like, it was her 21st birthday when Christ was born. It's like as Christ was born on earth, that coincided with this individual biographical notion that when we are 21, our true ego, not the Luciferic I awareness, but the true I, is born in us. Yeah, I'm not sure I've mentioned a few things here that are saying more or less the same thing. Two streams meet in the Roman Empire. Resolution of the original sin of Lucifer, that was the Hebrew mission. You've got the resurrection of the body, also. So I'm feeling very vague here. I'm looking at my notes and thinking that I might have written something on here.
So are we looking at things that again are this incarnation of being called Sophia in not in a human physicality, but using the human physical? But what kind of relationship is this? Is just me, you sort of seem to be describing a being that is living in us and through us, but also has a life of its own, or her own.
And linking, my notes are correct. I've looked at them. Yes, and we can specifically point to the Hebrews as Sophia's role there was overcoming original sin, the corruption of the physical body, i.e. the phantom, the model of the body on what it's built. Whereas her role it's like in the Greek people, was the overcomings, like of the Aramanization of the darkening of consciousness that is an element of the Ahrimanic impulse that Steiner describes. So she is intimately involved in helping humanity to come to an ever greater understanding of Christ. One of the pictures that is sometimes used is so like Christ's power is so overwhelming that we are not capable of receiving like the whole impulse, and it goes through like a filtering stage, just like through the three hierarchies. So Sophia or Kuriotetes spirits, they receive into themselves like this almighty spiritual impulse, this Christ impulse, and it's like, if I can say, like turns down the intensity of it, and then she passes it on to Michael, her son, and he's like dialed it down a little bit, so that's like human beings might be capable of receiving. It's like a bit slowly waking up to the unfathomably, the ineffably large scope of this impulse that was the turning point in time.
So I'm sort of vaguely beginning to sort of see, because I'm trying to reconcile this individual who was 21 at this time, who's having a development and evolution of her own, with also what we started with, the slide that we started with, which is you will come to realize she is you.
Do you want to comment that, Jeff, or shall I?
I wanted to bring Ahriman into the room. Come on.
All right, mate.
Because this idea of the phantom is quite a mystery, actually, through the esoteric work of Steiner that he doesn't mention a lot. But it's the suggestion is that Ahriman can't go through the gates of death, right? But is in our body the way we're talking about Sophia or the Christ, or I don't know where the Michaelic figure is, but there, as part of the incarnating process, say, we have this collective shadow. So maybe this Ahriman can teach us about Sophia. Maybe we have something to learn from. Actually, I think we have something to learn from Sophia Montgomery on this very issue, because you've mentioned the way Sophia is in the sort of technological collective intelligence, you have alluded to that, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's right, Jeff. So just when we were talking before about the Philosophia part of the tools that we start to create to master nature, and to me that is the death of Sophia. Because we start to rely on those, and really Sophia is my feeling of her is that she's grounded. So we must use those tools, but in a network that have to be founded in something like love. But we actually cast all of that away. We cast the web, and the divine feminine Sophia. All of it it's the oikos. The system is always the feminine, mother mind. In the Gospel of Mary, and it's all of that. We just throw all of that away, and then we keep these little tools that are really super exciting, and those are detritus. Really, they're not her anymore, because they all need to be together. Rhetoric, philosophy, love, language, poetry. All of it needs to be together. and we start to split everything and divorce it and kill it. And it's all ungrounded and unbounded. To me, it's not Sophia anymore at that point.
I think this points to who it is that I invited into the room, and its own. I don't think Sophia's dead. I don't think that's. I don't think that. I think that it's possible that she's trapped in a web of electromagnetic densities and the belief system of brain-bound thinking as a mirror of those, not only just a mirror, but the way in which those technologies were created as a symptom of that brain-bound thinking. But yet, at the same time, here in the evolution is the possibility of a revolution at the point of the brain. And there's a mysterious thing that Steiner says in Philosophy of Freedom, and we've wrestled with it a little bit in trying to come to terms with what thinking is. If it's a spiritual activity, then this makes sense. But then again, you have to do more than posit it. And that statement is that when thinking enters as a spiritual activity, it at first suppresses the physical activity of the brain, the physiological activity of the brain. And then as a second move, it replaces that activity with itself, with its own process. And that is, to me, where we can begin to enter into this collective consciousness as an intelligence, as opposed to as ideological claptrapping or a technological suspension of wisdom as or a technological suspension or entombment of wisdom in technological networks of suspension. So there's a mystery here in the brain relationship, the neurological relationship with the sort of technological neurology that's blanketing the planet, say.
So just wanted to say as well, like the Christ in. So Steiner said, if we've got Ahriman and Lucifer in the right spot, mediated by Christ, that they're actually strengths, they're actually good things. The same with Sophia. I feel that she's actually twisted. I think we've neglected her, we've abused her, we've taken her fruits but thrown the rest away. And she's floating around like Lucifer and Ahriman without being mediated, and she's twisted. And I think what we're seeing is this dark element of Sophia now. And they say behind every great man is a great woman, and I think that behind Ahriman is actually Sophia, but the shadow of her. And so we're getting these really brilliant things happening, but they're just so awfully brilliant.
This what you're saying there, Sophia, leads into the next slide. I'll put it up, but just before we go forward, I just want to. You invited Ahriman into the room, Jeff, but we also know that Michael he duffed him up in 1879, so he's met his match.
Yeah, but he duffed him up in his realm and threw him down to ours. There you go.
Exactly. And so we have to permeate our thinking with Michaelic consciousness. But why am I bringing this up? I put up this slide, but actually I should have put up where is it? This slide. No, sorry. This slide. Just to explain why I think it's relevant. So we're here, and we as individual human beings, we received our I from the exousiae, which is the it's like we've got angels, archangels, archai, and then exousiai. If we go back on the moon, the angels were having like their human moment of becoming individualized, and then it was the spirits of movement who were the givers of the eye. But if we go back to the old sun, then it's actually Michael as an archangel was going through its human moment. And who was the giver of the eye impulse to Michael? It was the Kuriotetes, which is wisdom, which is Sophia. And this is why there's this direct relationship between Sophia, Michael, and why Michael, there's so much emphasis in Steiner's later work, later conferences about Michael. And then occasionally it filters through that Michael is the vessel for the Sophia knowledge, or the Sophia wisdom that permeates the cosmos. And then coming back to what you were saying about the perverted nature of how the Sophia nature has been perverted. Steiner talks about how that as a result of the Luciferic impulse, that the wisdom that's trying to be communicated to us in the Osiris Isis Horus myth is exactly this perversion that we're describing, that the complete cosmic wisdom that can be given to us, can be ensouled in us. In the ancient Egyptian world, that knowledge was called Isis. And the Isis myth is about how Typhoon Ahriman chops up Isis, which is like the Christ body, but Isis is also her cosmic wisdom is reduced down to a Luciferic picture of. So she has been humanity through being permeated with like the Luciferic impulse has lost, or it lost its ability. The extent to which the Luciferic impulse entered into the soul determined the extent to which it had lost its contact with the Sophia, with the Kuriotetes. It's like true cosmic wisdom. And there's several things to say around this. I'm going to start by just reading this particular quote out of there, which I think we'll see how it relates all the way back to this, like the first video that we did, but also points to this idea that we have. I'm just going to. When we talk the Isis myth, it's like an essence of like the Isis mystery was like in ancient Egypt. So no mortal man can lift my veil. And Steiner says that this is now we are in the age when every mortal must lift my veil. So this is the time when Sophia goes beyond us in her evolution to the spirit self. We're still in the consciousness soul. She can then be the leader back into this cosmic consciousness, but at an individual soul consciousness awareness. Let me just read this and see if it sparks off some thoughts. I think it's interesting. In the Egyptian myth, the veiled Isis says, I am the all, I am the past, the present, and the future. No mortal has yet lifted my veil. In the new Isis legend, as told by Rudolf Steiner, the Isis figure states, "I am the human being. I am the past, present, and the future. Every mortal should lift my veil." This extraordinary story challenges modern humanity to awaken to a new consciousness of the spiritual forces that work in our lives and in society. We are to bear this new spirit within us with increasing understanding and a fresh sense of responsibility. So Sophia isn't dead. We're a little bit in the same mistake of like the dull grey scientists with their dead shadow-like thinking, saying everything is dead shadow-like thinking. We need to raise ourselves to an experience of this being. She's alive and well. It's just there's not enough of us on planet Earth who are actually like awake to, able to receive the amount of wisdom that she would be able to impart. We need to grow up.
Can I
need to grow up?
Can I offer not a different perspective, but maybe an added perspective? From a karmic standpoint, I believe Steiner refers to our time as this time. So in Sophia's gyre, we are back here again.
Yep.
2000.
Right. So we were the people who were experiencing this reality and this consciousness, and because of that, the veil. So we're back there, but we're not. We're here. So we're here experiencing a similar consciousness as they were experiencing, or as we were experiencing as previous us's. And there's a few other things. So Steiner refers to reincarnation into lives as alternating between male and female. So I want to bookmark the idea that there's what is the relationship between male and female and divine feminine and divine masculine, say. And then if there's alternating between the two, does Sophia herself alternate between the two? And are we about to add a fourth to the Trinity with Sophia going through the gates of death and resurrecting in the spirit self? That's a question that I have, because to pass through the consciousness soul age and to enter the spirit self, we have to relive the crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection, and the 3 days entombed in the material world. Three being, not tomorrow, the next day, and the following day, but 3 days, obviously, in cosmic time or something like that. So I think that's all I want to say. Or it's more of a sort of line of questioning.
I'd like to like an attempt, like two partial answers to your question. I'm sure there's a lot of room for like added conversation around this, but Prokofiev, he looks at this question and he says, well, I mean, Sophia, she's male or female. It depends on how you look at it, because if you look at her as the receiver of the Christ impulse, then she is, it's like, in the sense that the feminine is the receiver, the embodier, the kingdom maker, then she is quite clearly feminine. But if she is the inspirer of Michael, then she is an active principle, and then in this mode of thinking, then she is masculine. So she is neither masculine or feminine. She is both, but it depends on which aspect of her that you're looking at. So this is this problem of involution, evolution, in the sense that it really does depend on where your starting point is. Where you could even call in Einstein here, it's relativity. Where are you coming from when you ask that question? And then I can tell you whether Sophia is masculine or feminine. But he also tries to answer it in another way. And he says that another way that the ancients sort of like differentiated between masculine and feminine is that, so like, if there was a collection of beings, spiritual beings, they were often represented as feminine. So if you think about Sophia as so like a body of human, so I haven't developed this like much in these slides that we've talked about so far, but another way of viewing Sophia's evolution is, first she incarnated herself, made her presence felt in the spirits of movement, then in the exousiae, then in the archai, then in the archangels, then in the angels, and now she's involved in man. But she spans all 7 hierarchies. And in the sense that she spans all 7 hierarchies, by this old understanding of what feminine can also mean, she is also considered feminine. So there isn't a one answer to this question. It's a hugely complicated question. Now, when is a woman a woman? Only when she's passive and not when she's active? Go on, Sophia. You can give us a good perspective on this, I'm sure. Where do your thoughts go when I talk like that?
Well, to me,
anti-masculine.
To me, in the evolution, there's actually 2 energies going on, like a caduceus staff, and there are in the involution as well. And so my view is that she's in both, and there's masculine in both as well. Jeff's got some really interesting ideas about as you evolve, if you're a real man, then you sort of become feminine towards the end, sort of thing, when you spiritually evolve. So I think there's both. I would actually say, if we look back at Caduceus's staff, and I'd actually say that she's more the wings, the home, and it's a sort of a more of a principle rather than something being masculine or feminine. I'd say, yeah, she's the wings that connects everything and connects to source as well, and keeps everything dynamic and whole and balanced. But I don't know. I don't think there's actually an answer to your question.
Well, I think they're all the answers are. Right?
Yeah,
it's consilience because
yeah,
because it's first principles all the way down, right? So it's not one is a noun suddenly, and it's just an objective reality, and that we just have to accept that as substance and static and that sort of thing. But everything is in this process, and it's also just another little wrinkle is I forgot to mention, which is that Steiner refers to the human soul as the opposite in principle to the physical body.
Yeah.
And so
I thought it's the etheric body was the opposite in principle. The soul is without set gender.
Maybe that's the case.
That's also my understanding, Jonathan. Yeah.
Although the soul is incarnating into the etheric body, so
Okay. Yeah.
and that's part of its mission. So
Right.
so I'm not sure that I'm not. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Well, I find this really difficult to think about because there was a time when we had no sexes, there was no separation, And so if we were in that time before that occurred, how then would we think about a being called Sophia? Do you know what I mean? That may have both inspiring and receiving natures within itself. It's really, I don't really know how to think about that, because, you know, we're so used to there's this and then there's that, and they're separate.
I would like to offer a picture. One of the things that, and this isn't a complete picture, but it seems to be offering a potential part of an answer to the type of question you're asking there, John. Because, Jonathan, one of the things that I was like struggling with the Riddles of Philosophy is how is Steiner able to have such a complete overview of all of these philosophers? He's got like some way of viewing the world, viewing philosophy, that's like enables him to like see how it's strengthening a certain picture and how it's lacking in another area. He continually does it like throughout. It's like, what's the source of it? And I'm not saying this is the answer, but this is like where my thinking has been taking me. And it's in the concept of the Trinity, we've got the concept of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And sorry, Sophia, I know there's I'm just going to stick with that one, but there's also there's this idea of the mothers and this bit, but I just don't know that part so well, and I'd love it if you could fill us in on that, or Jeff, I believe you also might know something about that, but I'll present what I think might be an answer to your question, Jonathan. If we take the principle of the Father as described in the Lord's Prayer, Steiner, like in his lectures, he gives us this beautiful image. He says, imagine you're in a sphere. It's like a hollow sphere, and there's this impulse. It's like creates life out of itself. It's the unbegotten begotten, the creator of everything. And you can relate this to the Kabbalah, and the words used there, which aren't off the top of my head at the moment. But we've got this impulse to life, this active impulse that is creating this invisibleness, this will, this Schopenhauerian will, if you like, that's there at the center of this globe. But until it meets the outside of this globe, it is always invisible. And this outside of the globe is the kingdom or the sun. But the thing is, it's like this is a receptive element. If the Father is the active principle, then the edge of this globe, or the edge of the universe, this like cosmic womb where everything is born into it, then that also begins to take on, it's like what could be described as a feminine aspect, in the sense that it is receiving an impulse and incarnating it, or manifesting it. We don't have to use the word but it's a manifestation of something that's invisible. And I've been trying to use, I'm wondering if this is like part of a sufficient model for it's like having a framework in which we can begin to, it's like zoom out to a whole. And when we if we imagine this simplistic image that I've given at the center of this sphere of this globe, we've got this invisible impulse, and then it's like on the outside we've got all these manifestations and different manifestations of this central impulse. They're all like little mini mirrors, dotted around the inside of this globe that we are in, this universe that we are in. But we've also got this third perspective, which is the ability to overview this whole process, the active and the passive, and this soul capacity to permeate that whole thing with or to identify thinking, feeling, and willing in that whole process. That's a little bit how I've been trying to understand how Steiner manages to create the book like he did. But I also feel it begins to help me tackle these problematic questions like male and female, and what it might be like to be in a non-male, non-female, sorry, in a whole state. So in the picture that I've just given, it's this consciousness that is able to see the whole that is neither male nor female. It transcends it, and therefore is like what in Christianity is called the Holy Spirit. I don't know. I'd love if you could find holes in that, and I'd also love to hear if that's like helps.
No, I think that's lovely. This thing, this viewpoint that can see the kind of the dualities that, and something you spoke about, that the sort of life in that seemed to be this thinking, feeling, and willing. So something beyond that duality as well. But it's still kind of difficult, you sort of, in the sense of what is that observer thing? Yeah. But is it just an observer? Because you've sort of involuted the disco ball. But what is the disco?
we are the disco.
I mean, it feels correct, but it's just so odd, that on one hand we're observing, but on the other hand, intimately involved.
I think this is where the flexibility comes in. This is why the Riddles of Philosophy is of such immense importance. And I'm not saying the philosophy of freedom isn't either, but it forces us in an even bigger way to confront the diversity of viewpoints about life. Because we're drawn into these philosophical views, these world conceptions, and it's hard work. But when we go through that hard work, we are actually growing in our own ability to see things from different perspectives. We're becoming less static.
I think it's something that observer is at the same time observing themselves, in the sense that Steiner, like with Nietzsche, he didn't just partly he had a wonderful memory, so he could compare these different people and their viewpoints, but also he didn't just he really lived into it. So he was so much into their viewpoint, he got out of himself into their viewpoint in the middle of the glitter ball or whatever, and so within that, at once being an outsider and an insider, he could then see beyond them and to see how they related to other people, and where that whole thing may be going, or obviously is going.
How each little mirror was a reflection of the original impulse. That ability to connect the two, the begetter and the begotten, which
Yes.
if we just live in the one or the other isn't capable of doing that. It needs. I do think there's a connection with language, first, second, and third person perspective. I've not managed to develop that thought, but it feels also to me, just at a feeling level at the moment, that there's some type of connection going on there, because it also corresponds to this idea that is presented to us by Steiner, that we are a double being. We never really incarnate 100%, in the sense that there's a higher aspect of ourself that is waiting for us to connect with it. But we are obviously very real down here when we're living in the flesh.
And we're calling this Sophia.
Well, he also says that she is us. So, if you think back to your presentation as relates to the God within in the Hebraic tradition, that God within was a reflection. So the soul, Yahweh is the God of the moon, right? So, the soul is no longer a reflection. To reiterate in this context what we were talking about, it is or must become the God, not a reflection of the God. So what does that mean? But it's something to do with participating in creation, and we do that because we create ourselves. So we create selves, and it's easy to dismiss that. And this is another argument, or disagreement I got in with David is who are you to say that the subjective is not is just an illusion, or just something that is not to be taken phenomenologically seriously. This is why I keep harping on my lament that we haven't even tried psychology yet. We have not used the perspective of the spirit to examine the way in which the soul moves and is moved, and what its relationship with the rest of nature is, as an embodying human universal intelligence, say.
That was the thing that, people say, but quantum physics is reaching this point where it's including the observer in the experiment. So it's the spirit could be observing the soul and actually understand it is the soul as well. So I feel like you think I'm going off tangentially, and I probably am. It felt to me it was intimately connected to what you were just saying, Jeffrey.
Yeah, no, I think it is, but I think you responded well to that too, which is that is a onlooker consciousness that only is pointing at the reality that actually has to be.
It also is that reality too.
Yes. Yes.
That's what I was getting from your picture, Angus.
Yeah, it's a picture I'm like trying to develop further, because it feels like there's some parts that I'm less, that don't.
Can we go back to that that slide you had of involution and evolution, because you were talking about this globe, the sphere, and it has an outer and an inner and something that is moving within.
That one.
Yeah. Because one is those change into each other. I don't know, because I think this is where what Rudolf Steiner has recommended, this kind of thing, is that if we can see how these change into each other. So, that circle in the middle of the one on that side, the right side, flattens or expands so far to infinity that it just becomes a plane in the one on the left-hand side. And obviously it's easier to sort of see how those discs have kind of inverted.
I think that the image of a hologram is also useful, Jonathan, here, if we're looking to, because
but it's sorry, just it's not just to look at, but to live through the transformations, and then we gain that mobility, that elasticity and strength of thought, so that we're not just stuck with these kind of pictures, but just looking, but we could gain a psychology where it's alive, and conscious. The soul is conscious of itself.
When the inner becomes the outer, or the outer becomes the inner, if we apply that to our inverted disco globe, then when we're in that, one of those little bits of glitter, one of those little mini
facets,
one of those little mini mirrors that's on the inside of this globe, that is a microcosm. It contains the whole in it. But if it lives within itself,
how does one move from one to the other? And that is what we're missing at the moment, because we can kind of conceive and we feel like the Holy Ghost, there's a connection between them, but we need to become that Holy Ghost, that connection.
Don't you think this is what he's talking to in chapter 18, though, in the Riddles of Philosophy, that he's talking about in the final chapter there, because the exercise he describes is we've got to intensify the soul life, and he uses a phrase, if I remember it correctly, we've got to create an artificial construct, so that we know it's a fiction we've created, but we live so intensively in this, what we know is a creation of ourselves, which is divorced from like our normal sense perception. And then after years, or perhaps decades, depending on like how developed we are, how much energy we put into this practice, what actually happens, the picture he describes is that a breakthrough happens where all of a sudden that life that is beyond, that is sort of like part of the spiritual world, it starts to invigorate those pictures. So he talks about how when this change happens, just like I know the difference between a watch and an imaginary watch, I'm not confused about whether this thing here is a figment of my imagination or whether it is something that's in my hand. There's no confusion there. And he describes how that after this transformation of consciousness, or this evolution of consciousness, we have the same clarity that this is no longer just an invention of my mind. This is something that has been imagined, inspired, or intuited into my soul from the spiritual world. But we're not, well, I'm certainly not there yet, but I do think he's mapping out this process.
We can't explain what the spiritual world is, and that's kind of what he's saying also, is that the soul doesn't have the language of the spiritual world, but the spirit is inherent in the soul already in thinking. So because it is, we can utilize that thinking with will to produce a subjectivity, to create ourselves and make ourselves available to other people as we create ourselves in front of them, say, so allow the other person inside our soul with thinking, because thinking isn't local to you or me. It is something that we can do willfully within our soul. So if you do that, then and you can experience the will within thinking strongly enough, the soul will wake up in the spiritual world, and that's without knowing that it made the transfer, say that it made its own self-transcendence occur. And it's, to me, it's always been this picture of God and, is it David, meeting, right? When wherever the spirit touches the soul becomes spiritual.
And it's important that it's an artifice. It's not a natural thing, because then what I believe what happens is that one reaches reality. We could call it the spiritual, without anything, without, you know. So there is reality, and there's nothing natural, nothing external. You didn't get there through that. Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of it. I'm not explaining myself very well, but it's important that it's something that isn't what we normally call real, because you're trying to get beyond what we normally call real to actual reality. And you know, what we normally call real is kind of holding us back, because, you know, it's just all out there. Well, that's a long story.
One thing that I noticed when I started writing poetry earlier this year, and I didn't know where it came from, but as I wrote, or as I composed, which is artifice, and I was imagining this imaginary world, it was and what would happen is it was like an echo. So it was creating a song, and I was throwing it into the void. And my soul had created this poetry. I was throwing it into the void, and I was listening to what was coming back. Was it discordant? Was what I was creating actually the same as what is in the spirit world? So Angus, just with you talking there about an artifice, that's what I started to do. So and some of my poetry was quite chaotic, but then I'd throw it in and I'd listen, and then I'd bring other bits back and start to it. And then it's almost like you're blind, but you're creating something through your imagination. It's a different, it's like eyes for the spirit world. And that might be what we all have to do. And I know in for instance, in the dark goddess kind of literature, where you have to go into the underworld, and through the veil and all these kinds of things that we've been talking about, it's very much about using art, writing songs, poetry, drawing, and you sort of have to switch everything off, and then things that become
you can be fructified.
Yes, yeah. And you start, and so when I was talking there about Sophia being twisted, that has been coming through in my poetry all the time. She's there, but she's inverted, and you can sort of start to make sense of what you see, the things that we see, the glitter around the globe that we can actually see, and we're like, why is all this happening? War and this and this and this and this. I need to get behind that, and I need to do that with my imagination, with my art, because that's the only way. If we try and look, we're never going to see it.
And we can only do that as individuals. We can support each other in that, but each person has to do it at her own imaginations. I can't go to a school and have this taught to me. I have to do the inner work myself.
No, that's right. And for me, my poetry switched on when I read the Gospel of Mary. It just went boom one night, and that was it. And so I think, you know, us talking about Sophia and getting really, really, really close to her and opening that veil, and suddenly we'll get these capabilities that we never thought that we could do.
Superman or Superwoman.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not saying my poetry is great at all, but for me, it's like another sense.
Yeah.
This is something I would think you would love Owen Barfield on this very bit, because he does speak of poetry as a sense opener, sort of, or maybe a sense. Maybe he's actually saying that a sense of one of the higher senses, perhaps, or I don't know. The next step for me is to connect the Rudolf Steiner's idea of the 12 senses with the 7 life processes, and this is just a very nascent point for something I wouldn't bring into the room right now, I suppose. But I think that what we're talking about is the development of another sense, or the evolution of a sense that we already have, like the sense of the other. And I would take a little bit of an exception. I'm not sure it's a disagreement necessarily, but a discernation that we do have to do the work on our own soul, but there's something collectively mysterious about that work that
Absolutely.
is both available and can't be done without other people. It's where 2 or more gathered, right? For example.
Totally random question, Sophia. Jonathan and Jeff might understand this question, but is this the first time, or did you read some similar type of poetry 20 years ago? 20 years isn't sort of like significant here, but so like, is this the first time you've read this type of thing, or is it so that so like 20, 30 years ago you were into this type of thing and now it's coming back to you at another level?
No, I'd never read anything like
Right.
that before, I don't think. Well, I mean, I'd gone down the rabbit hole with Hermes and all that kind of stuff. But no, this actually changed my mind, the way that my mind now sees things. And for me, what happens now is I put a question in my head, and then I'll go for a run, and the poem will just come, and it will answer the question. And I think what I'm realizing is that I think we've all got that capability, but there is that moment where you meet whatever it is. For me, it was the divine feminine through the Gospel of Mary, and it just changes you overnight, and then all of a sudden you've got this new skill.
You also suffered quite a bit in the moments leading up to that moment when you became turned inside out.
Yeah, and I think, I can't remember where I was reading it, but around Sophia, that you need to suffer first. Oh, it was it was in the Dark Goddess book that I'm reading at the moment. You have to suffer.
Isn't every sense organ that has evolved throughout human
A wound.
throughout humanity a wound? Yeah, a wound. Yeah. Isn't it something like you can just imagine the way in which the eyes were formed by the excruciating pain of the light.
And Jeff, when you were talking to me, so I've got PTSD, and you were saying it's not your mind that's damaged or hurt, it's your soul that's hurt. And for me, that totally made sense. And it's actually my soul that's given me this poetry. So it's actually telling me what's happening behind the veil. It's saying this is actually the story that's playing out behind the veil.
So the hurt, the pain of your soul made it sensitive to a new vision.
Potentially, and it was waiting, like we were talking before about the soul is rootless, like I think deliberately, so it's been made like that. But all of a sudden I was given that teaching, that esoteric teaching, and my soul just went, I found where I am now. Right. I can see where I am. I'm not just floating around in this glitter ball anymore, and I'm here, Mum, or whatever I am. And now I'm going to start telling you the story.
This This goes to that's so beautiful. This goes to what Angus was saying about if we experience the Christ, say, and all the intensity of that experience, we'd be blown apart, would literally physiologically probably explode because of the intensity of the light there, and that the divine countenance of Michael and Sophia are the sensory, the new sensory inputs, so to speak, or openings, and one has to suffer the deeds of light, like Goethe describes color as being,
and darkness.
And I'd probably also say that I evolved through involving. And so you evolve by actually going inward, not outward. So, sort of going back to that very first slide, that's where the wisdom is, isn't it? In going backwards.
It's where the mystery is too, because
Yeah.
your involution is intimately tied up with humanity's evolution. That's quite a reality to come to terms with. It's a hell of a responsibility too.
Mm.
Well, thanks for doing it. It's helping.
A reflection on what you just described there, Sophia. Many years ago, I did a deep dive into near-death experience literature, and it's so the parallel I'm seeing. I'm not saying it's the same thing. A parallel I'm seeing is how it's like people have to suffer immensely to wake up. That's been their particular path that they've chosen, and it's such a fascinating field to study. But if I had to pick one of the things that I learned in that process, which was so surprising, so new, but so understandable at the same time, it's how these people had to battle often for decades before they could reconcile themselves with this massive event that had happened to them, because they would live in a world, they'd come back from the dead, they knew they weren't imagining things, they'd had one of these real soul experiences that we've talked about here, they'd experienced into its full reality, realized this is every bit as real or even more real than the reality we're living in, and then they come back to this world and there's nobody they can talk to about it, or very few people. So it becomes extremely painful for them living in a world where nobody can understand or help them understand what it is that they've been through. And so they often talk about how these people, they need decades before they can experience it. It's like the fullness of the blessing. Of course, they recognize the blessing of becoming totally unafraid of death, and that life has meaning and these type of things, but also recognizing how they needed this painful experience so that they could arrive at where they are 20, 30 years later, where they've assimilated this process at a deeper level, where they've reconciled that they have this experience of the life, this direct experience of the spirit, but many people aren't there yet. They cannot. They haven't been. You could argue that's like they haven't been given the karmic blessing of experiencing that.
I think over the last 3 years, though, I think we'll find there's going to be a hell of a lot more people that just wake up and realize just what trauma they've been through. I think a lot of people don't actually realize that they're traumatized, but it will happen, and there'll be this.
We talked a little bit about that last time, didn't we? About a 3-year period for adults sort of a spiritual fact that it's a 3-year period for adults to really internalize trauma, to experience the depth of that trauma, right down into their physiology, and and then into their life processes. And again, the life processes become a key, I do believe, in this understanding. But we talked about it in relationship to how the adults are acting in front of children, and how the children are clairsentient and are they know exactly where the inconsistencies are without being able to be self-conscious about those inconsistencies. And that's a reckoning. But I think you're right that it's a unfortunately necessary suffering that will wake up more and more people.
Yeah.
It is actually waking up more and more people.
And look, and Angus, you mentioned before about it being an individual experience. I actually think this time around, Golgotha is going to be collective. It's going to be systemic. I think that there's going to be a collective spiritual awakening, and it might be that all of us one day wake up and suddenly we can all write poems or something like that. But I'm not sure that it's going to be individual this time around in the next decade or so.
Well,
no.
I think it's going to be both. It's going to be both, because it's going to be experienced by individuals as a collective reality, as it always was. It never wasn't, right?
We could meet behind the veil and write poems together.
Perhaps we are already doing that.
The thing is if it becomes, it's an individual thing, but it's an increasingly common experience. You just, Angus described these people that had an experience that was very difficult to integrate into the culture around them, because the culture just didn't have the means and wherewithal to kind of meet it. And there could be a problem in that all these people are having these experiences, but without there being some kind of culture that can integrate it, it's going to be sort of a myriad of individual experiences. And obviously the thing that we're talking about, anthroposophy, spiritual science, the sort of the golden jewels that are bequeathed in that understanding, it goes a long way to being able to meet people who've had near-death experiences, and B, people that wake up to supersensory perceptions, whereby it wouldn't just be a sort of a myriad of individual separate experiences, but it could become something that people can communicate, an understanding that people have of there being a greater reality we all belong to, and it not being kind of left chopped up and at the mercy of a myriad of other forces that could just sow a lot of confusion in a situation like that, where people are suddenly awakening to new things, and there isn't a culture that is able to communicate. They can communicate that too, and can communicate back to them about it.
There's no, well, at the moment, there's no myth, there's no story. I think a lot of us have got the same question now. It's the egregore, like a lot of people talk about that. And it's like all of our souls can see this monster, but they can't talk to us, and we're not listening. And they're all tap, 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 listen, this is what it looks like. We're trying to explain to you what it's like. And so there's this collective question. And then you've got all these different people that are writing poetry, drawing, writing novels, whatever. But it's the same question. It's trying to describe the same thing that all of our souls are seeing. Yeah, that's what I feel anyway. And Jonathan, so I think you're right. I think this is all going to come together at some point, but we do at the moment. We are missing that myth, that picture. But I think it's coming.
I think
there's sorry, got a quick picture to add to that. There's I think it's in the Fall of the Spirits of Darkness. There's one little paragraph where Steiner says something along the lines of, Araman will be in full control until Michael taps him on the shoulder, and it's like his power is taken away from him. And to me, that speaks a little bit to this awakening moment. And there's I think there's some interesting, if you look at the electric universe theory and these people who are, there's some Suspicious Observers is a channel on YouTube that's big into this thing. But if we look at what might be happening on the sun and the things they're talking about, and there's a lot of what I would call healthy science, not YouTube science. I'm talking proper science here. So talking about the electric nature of the universe and how without going too technical, of the galactic sheet and these recurrent geomagnetic events on the sun that have huge implications for the Earth. They have throughout history, and it seems, I want to emphasize it seems, because I'm not claiming to know, but that we are that period is upon us yet again. And if we think about how Araman is in control through the electric grid that maintains us at the moment, I think we have an image there of how we could have a life-changing event for practically every single person on the planet if the lights go out one day and they don't come on for 6 months or a year.
Especially where you live, Angus.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Jeff, you wanted to? I'm just looking at the time. Perhaps, Jeff, we've been going a fantastic conversation. Perhaps, Jeff, you wanted to add something. I was thinking we could round out because we've been going for nearly 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that the new mythology is reality again. It's the perception of reality again, at the level of that which gives birth to mythologies. So that's our creation, but it's a perception of reality. It's not a well, it's probably what the Greeks did, but we're doing it with our independent souls, for and with each other.
Okay, shall I press stop?
That's a great place to end.
A great place to end.